Hi everyone, welcome to episode number 21 of the High Frequency Podcast. This is going to be the final episode of 2023. Thank you to everyone who has listened and subscribed and downloaded the episodes in 2023. I really do appreciate it. The podcast has grown exponentially this year, and I think I've said it on every single episode, and it's partially just because every single time I do an episode, I'm quite astounded by the numbers that just keep increasing in terms of downloads. And again, this never intended to be as big as it is right now, and the audience that I have is definitely dedicated and fantastic, and I appreciate you all, I really do. So Merry Christmas everyone. I hope you all have a fantastic holiday over the Christmas break, and we will definitely be back in 2024 with some fantastic guests. Now, I was going to do an episode on myself once again. Like I did last December, I was going to do a full episode on me where I got to showcase some of the music that I've made in 2023. But I'm not going to do that today. I'm actually going to save that potentially for early next year. There's a few bits of music that I haven't yet finished that I would really like to show everyone. And I just don't really feel like I'm ready to put that music out there right now. And for those of you who are listening who do make music, you'll know exactly what I say when you've got a feeling that it's just not ready to be out there right now. So maybe I'll wait another month or two and then we'll get it out. You'll also have to forgive me in this episode because I forgot to turn my microphone on, so you'll notice that there's quite a bit of reverb in the background when I speak on the podcast. I have tried my best to edit that out, but it's just not really editable. But you don't listen to the podcast to listen to me anyway, so it's all about the guest today. But what I have realised over the past 5 or 6 episodes, I've had guests on the podcast who have been in the game for a long time. You know, some of them have been in the game 10 plus years. And the majority of those guests have been Auckland based. And I just really feel like those guests in particular and some of the Auckland DJs that I have on the podcast just don't really know what it's like to be a DJ outside of Auckland in 2023. So in order to find a little bit of balance, I thought I should pick a guest who has started their DJ hustle post-pandemic in order to see what kind of perspective they have on our scene and what lessons they may have learned as an up-and-coming DJ and promoter in 2023. Ryan and I have connected a few times in 2023. He's been kind enough to help promote the podcast all over his social media, and he's even booked me for a large show in Hawke's Bay, but due to some external factors out of his control as a promoter, unfortunately the show couldn't go ahead. We've also had a couple of chats back and forth on interesting topics that I thought could really add some value to you, the listener. So without further ado, please welcome DJ and promoter from Hawke's Bay, New Zealand, LarryNobody. Okay, Mr. DJ LarryNobody, Ryan from LikeThat Promotions, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, hey Adam, thanks for having me.
No problem, man. I really wanted to get you on recently because we've been having a couple of chats offline, of course, you know. We can talk about it in a bit, but obviously we were gonna do a bit of a gig together in Hawke's Bay at some point.
Yep.
Obviously stuff didn't work out, but that was outside of your control as a promoter, which some of the struggles we can talk about today. But look, you know, I really wanted to have you on because I think, like we were chatting about just off air just now, I think it's really important for this platform to also have relatively newer artists to the scene on the podcast to sort of explain, you know, exactly why they've come on to the scene and what they're offering to the scene, and also the struggles of being a DJ outside of Auckland, right? You know, because I can really relate to that myself. And a lot of the guests that I've had on as of late, if you've looked at the podcast as of late, Andy, you know, Greg, Logan, they're all Auckland based. They've all been doing this over 10 years. So I just think it's really important to have some different perspective on the podcast. And yeah, with you being a promoter yourself as well, I think you've got a lot to add. So, so I guess just to start off with, as I normally do, Ryan, give us a bit of a background, who you are, you know, where you are today with this whole DJ music thing, promoting thing, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess it's a bit of a funny introduction to my time as in especially DJing and probably more so house music. I think I grew up in Hawke's Bay, you know, been overseas, lived a bit in Auckland, and have come back to Hawke's Bay have been here for 2 years. This September actually back home. I think at high school, house music and EDM, wasn't really a thing within our friend group, within our crew. We were punk rockers. We listened to NoFX and Mad Caddies and Frenzal Rom, and we were rugged skateboarders. And that was sort of the image that we portrayed. And it wasn't until I sort of grew into my 30s, probably mid to late 30s, where I actually started to enjoy EDM and more so house music. Being exposed, I think, to that, being in the bigger city of Auckland and having done a bit of travel around Europe, especially, you know, as you probably know yourself, being from that side of the world, they're just covered in clubs and bars and that sort of scene. And I think what really drew me to be a DJ is the fact that I was that guy that was at parties growing up, that was always passionate about music, always wanted to put on music, always was the excited one at the time to be like, hey, I've got a great song, you guys have got to hear this. And I used to go to parties and see DJs up there, actually sharing their music and playing to the crowd and getting that response. And I was like, man, I want to be doing that. I want to be standing up there throwing it down. I want people to be vibing and, me to be creating that vibe. So it wasn't until the first lockdown, actually, which, I think we go back to about March 2020, where I actually decided to, sort of try and learn it. I've always been anxious about starting that journey. Where do you start, as a new DJ? Where do you get your music? What do I need to do? So I actually went and bought one of those tiny Newmark controllers for about $200. They've got, sort of discs on them, I think about the size of teacup plates. And sort of plugged that into my computer and it's like, right, we're going to start DJing. But, you got no idea what actually happens as soon as you plug that USB stick into your computer. You start Googling and learning quite quickly how to pull all that together. So, yeah, during that lockdown, spent a lot of time, sort of doing online tutorials and actually learning, teaching myself how to DJ because there was no one else to help, obviously, during that time. So I actually bought an online course. I can't remember the guy's name, but he was a British guy, and I actually paid for an online course, which took me a couple of weeks of sort of an hour or two here and there, and actually taught myself to DJ. What I've learned, that was 3.5 years ago, and what I've learned, from actually doing that is you can learn the basics. You can have someone like that teach you the basics, but there's so much you learn as you go. And obviously, I'm a pretty young DJ, only having done it for 3.5 years. I'm not a young person. I'm in my early 40s, so actually learning a new trade and dedicating yourself to it, especially when you've got a young family. I've got a day job as well, so DJing for me is very much a side hustle. And just learning, putting your hours in to learn that new trade, and have that vision of being that guy up there at your mate's 40th birthday party, just creating that vibe is where I wanted to get to.
Yeah, man. No, that's a super cool story, and it's a real testament to the amount of education that's online in this space these days, particularly in the music production space. It's gone absolutely boom over the last few years, and I think that is probably, in fact, I would say a lot of it's come out of the lockdowns. Where people were stuck at home and they thought, "Oh, do you know what? I've actually got time to learn that thing that I've wanted to do for 10 years," and so much of it has come out. YouTube and all these different platforms are littered with education. And, obviously people like yourself who you've probably put it off for years and years and years. And I think it's quite refreshing to hear someone in their late 30s, early 40s picking this up when it's typically seen as quite a young person's game, and we can come on to the whole age thing, because obviously you and me were a similar age, so we can relate to this. Being at a club and DJing and being around all these young people, it kind of, how does it make you feel? Because sometimes it makes me feel a little bit like I shouldn't be there. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely run into situations at certain gigs where you feel like the old guy. I think it's the vibe that you bring, right? Like, it's how you dress, it's the type of music you play, it's how you portray yourself. You look at some of the older guys, in New Zealand, they're 10, 15 years older than us, and they're still throwing it down for people our age and people younger. I think it's it's how you portray yourself as a DJ and that vibe that you bring for sure.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I think that's a really, really fair point, and it really is again a true testament to um, the the way that society portrays certain things isn't always accurate, such as this whole DJ and music club thing. It's not just for the young people, as maybe the mainstream media or maybe your parents would make it out to be, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think that's really important to take away. So that's a really, really good point. So when you were learning to do this in the lockdown, what was the? Because obviously you said the intention was to get up there and you wanted to be throwing it down in a club. You know, how far has that got you so far? Have you managed to play around the country? Like what's kind of come out of that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that where I sort of cut my teeth, I guess, is a local bar here in Napier called Market Street, which is it's a pretty well, New Zealand renowned bar. It's won lots of awards. It's a great place. It's got a great vibe. People love it. It's right in the centre of town, so noise restrictions have always been a bit of a challenge. I actually knew the owner reasonably well. Our kids went to school together, and I obviously started chatting to him about what I was doing and how I wanted to get gigs and things. And he very kindly um, gave me a night and a Saturday night there. So I took along. I had I think I had a step up of a controller by then. I had the next size up. Actually bought a Pioneer controller, and the system was already there in the bar, so I just went and plugged into that. And he basically just put his full trust in me to, go and play music and hope that his patrons would enjoy it. They loved it so much that they actually gave me a residency. So I ended up playing there every Saturday night, probably for about 6 months. Then had a bit of a break, and then went back to it for 6 months. So the step forward that gave me from being a bedroom DJ or a kitchen party DJ, as a group of friends, we used to, well, we still do actually. We call them kitchen parties, and we go around to someone's house, and you have a nice dinner and have a few drinks, and you sort of party the night away, and you always end up in the kitchen for some reason. Everyone stands around the kitchen.
It's so
You've got
true.
all these beautiful places in the house, your outdoor area and your lounge, and all these cool places to sit, but everyone ends up standing in the kitchen. So, we used to set up the decks and play some beats in the kitchen. But yeah, getting back to, obviously playing live to people at Market Street is you just learn so much. You learn so much about the type of music that you're playing, how people respond to it, how the bar staff respond to it, and probably learning the stages of the night. Like I thought I've got a pretty good ear for music. I had a pretty good ear for music for years prior to that, but DJing in an environment like that, which you sort of started off from, I started playing about 9 o'clock, I think, and the first hour was always background, what I call background beats. So you're playing sort of minimal house or down tempo or some sort of vibey music that people know that you're there, but you're not annoying them because they're still eating their dinner. And then obviously that journey through the night where you now start seeing people tapping their foot. People starting to sort of groove a little bit as they walk to the toilet or something. You're like, oh, something's starting to happen here. Something's changing in the evening. Obviously, as that night evolves and people have a few more drinks, and all of a sudden you got one or two people on the dance floor, and it's like, whoa, okay, this is foreign to me. What do I do here? What you do there is you've got to keep playing the same beats that got them on the dance floor. And as a new DJ, that just brought so much anxiety because that floor filler or that banger that got them up there, you probably got one or two in your set list. So the 20 others that you need to keep them there just didn't exist on the set list. So you end up sort of learning a lot over that time, that the first 6 months of DJing every Saturday night and having, it was a revolving door. It wasn't a paid door, so people come and went, and you had different people coming and going all night. But you just can't beat that actual time in an environment like that. Learning as you go and learning live. It just taught me so much.
Yeah, yeah. And Steve's a good friend of mine as well, actually. I've known him for a long time. You know, Steve the
Yeah,
owner. He's a good man.
he's a good guy.
He's one of those kind of guys that just sees the best in everybody and is willing to give
Absolutely.
everybody a chance. Him and Sarah have done a great job with Market Street. I just think
Yeah, it's fantastic.
I don't know, it offers quite a lot to Hawke's Bay, to Napier in particular, because there's not that many other places right now. I mean, what do you reckon? What's the scene like in Napier?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's probably one of the challenges with Hawke's Bay, especially with playing the type of music that I like to play. The, the they just don't exist. Like I think you relate. I relate the scene in Hawke's Bay a lot to Auckland because I used to live in Auckland and I still get up there a lot to play music and things. But you places like Ink Bar, places like Fitzroy, places like the Mothership, places like El Bruto, even Ahu, which is a relatively new bar owned by the same owner as Fitzroy. The places like that just don't exist in Hawke's Bay. I remember going back, sort of probably to my late 20s. There was a place called Promotor, which was a bar down on the waterfront there, and that used to pump like that. Used to be the first Friday night of every month they had a DJ, and people used to go and actually dance and listen to that type of music. But there's probably not one bar in Hawke's Bay that comes to mind where you've got that regular scene happening every weekend. Like you have places where people book, like promoters will actually book and put on a paid gig, but you can't just think, oh, let's go out tonight. We're going to go down to Ink Bar at 10 p.m. and we're going to see some crazy tech house and we're going to have a fantastic night because that's what we feel like doing tonight. Those type of places just don't exist in Hawke's Bay. So you can go out for a nice dinner. You can, they might have an acoustic artist singing some great tracks and playing the guitar, but you just don't have the type of music that you want to rave out to regularly in Hawke's Bay locations.
Yeah, I would agree with that. With my previous job, and this is how I know Steve, I spent quite a lot of time in Hawke's Bay, and I do think that, Hawke's Bay is lacking, and I would say this for many places, to be honest with you. I mean, Wellington is the same these days, and it's really lacking some kind of live music scene. It doesn't have to be electronic music, it's lacking places where bands can go play, places where a guy with a guitar can just get up and play. It's lacking a lot of that kind of stuff, and I don't really know why that slipped off so much because it used to be such a popular thing. I wonder, and again, this is pure speculation, but I wonder if it's a generational thing. I wonder if the young people of today just aren't interested in live music as much. I don't know.
Yeah, it could be that, and I think that the live music scene, I guess, like when you look at bands and things like that in Hawke's Bay, is probably still very prominent. Like, there's an amazing amount of clever musicians in Hawke's Bay. There's a couple of what I call quite grungy sort of bars that are having 3 piece or 6 piece or rock bands or sort of coming in regularly, but they're paid events as well. So people are paying 20, $30 to go and see these. I think the younger generation. I think it comes down to money. People, all these gigs cost money, so people don't necessarily have that extra disposable income to be buying tickets to go to these gigs. I think it comes down to the type of people that may like that sort of music, are a bit older, maybe have families, so they don't get out as often. On the one-off chance that they've got a kid-free night or they're getting a group of friends together to go out. They have to pick and choose what they're doing. But I mean, getting back to sort of the electronic scene in that younger generation, what I find, being a house DJ and being a promoter is the 20 to 30-year-olds, the ones that are prepared to, to get out there and party and want to get out there and get lit every Friday and Saturday night. They really love drum and bass, and that's a really hard thing to cut through when they're growing up, with that heavier sound, and you want to go and play some sexy house music. It's they're just not going to come to your gigs because it's the polar opposites of the type of music they want to listen to.
I've always found that really interesting about New Zealand. It's been this way for a long time, and don't get me wrong, it is a good thing that there is an electronic music scene here, and yes, it's drum and bass. It's not our preference, but it's still good that the youngsters are into some kind of electronic music because that means that in the future they may transition into a more soulful kind of house music. Who knows? Maybe when they mature a little bit more and they get out of this always wanting this super high energy peak from drum and bass all the time, maybe they will fall into house music. Who knows? But
Yeah, maybe that might be the same as us growing up being punk rockers and then listening to house music as we get a bit older. Maybe it is an age thing. Maybe your ears get a bit sore or something.
I reckon, man. Yeah, I know my ears are pretty damaged from gigs when I was younger. That's for sure. Yeah. So what kind of? Because obviously you run a promotion agency, like that. That's right.
Yeah,
Called like
like
that.
that.
Okay, cool. So tell us a little bit about that. What inspired you to actually do that, and what have you managed to do with that today? Because it's, I guess, was this running prior to you being an artist, or is this something that's come to fruition in the last couple of
No,
years?
so I think yeah, the DJing side of things has been about 3.5 years. Like that has been about 1.5. So I think as a as a new DJ in the Hawke's Bay scene, you're trying to connect with people. The networking, and it's like any business really. Like like any sort of sales job. At the end of the day, like as a DJ, you're trying to sell yourself. It's like any salesman in any business trying to sell a product or a service. You've got to hustle. You've got to know people. You've got to connect with people. And as I said earlier, so being a bit older and having a family, you're not, you're not as out being social as much as you used to be when you're 20 and 30. So you've got to make time to do that. So it's not only the connection through social media and emailing people and throwing mixes around and saying, hey, I know you're a promoter or you're a bar owner. I want to play at your bar or I want to come play at your festival. You've got to meet them. You've got to be meeting them in person. You've got to be talking to them. They've got to know you. You've got to know them. They've got to like you. They've got to like your sound. And that's not, that doesn't go for me just being in Hawke's Bay. That's any DJ or promoter around New Zealand. It's I think that that becomes a lot of hard work, and it really resonated with me a couple of weeks ago. I was lucky enough to chat to Hamish Pinkham from who started Rhythm and Vines. He actually did a talk at a local bar here, and it was open for DJs and promoters and musicians to come and ask him a few questions. And one of the questions I asked him was, what do you look for when you're looking for artists? Obviously, I'd love to be up there throwing down beats at Rhythm and Vines one year. That would be a dream come true. And he kind of told me what I already knew is, you've got to be consistent. You've got to hustle. You've got to have a good press kit. You've got to be polite. Um, and I think, I've never sort of been an outwardly confident person. You sort of think about how annoying do I have to be to this person to get a gig? And the way he answered the question on that is, it's like if you're being polite and you're asking the right questions, to get the right output. It's not about being annoying. It's showing that you're passionate about something and that you want to play music at their event and have a fantastic time. And that's not. He said that's not you being annoying. That's you showing your passion. So that really resonated with me. Being polite, being on the hustle, being consistent, constantly releasing mixes, and being consistent with it. I think we all know as promoters that that's what we have to do to get gigs. Um, that we just have to keep doing that. So like that was started 1.5 years ago, and the reason I started like that is so I could play music. That was really the only really underlying factor. Is that I saw it as an easier way to pull together, I guess, DJs or musicians and create my own events rather than having to hustle to these other promoters to get to play at their events. So there's got to be a better way. And I think the gig I actually did for like that was actually up in Auckland. I spent a lot of time sort of touching base with bar owners and promoters and things up in Auckland because as a DJ, I think that's where we all aspire to be. Is that's where the scene is. Um, and approaching bars as a DJ, they kind of go, "Oh yeah, cool. Thanks very much. We'll keep you in mind if anything comes up." If you approach the bar as a promoter and go, "Hey, I'm from Hawke's Bay. We've got a great bunch of DJs. We're going to bring up 3 or 4 guys, and we're going to throw it down, and the Aucklanders are not going to know what's hit them." They go, "Oh, okay, we should actually think about this. This could be quite cool." That started to get me more events, and obviously my crew, the LikeThat crew, started to get us more events by doing that than it did playing for other promoters in Hawke's Bay. So that's where LikeThat was born. Is to get us gigs so we could play music.
It's actually crazy how many people have done the exact same thing. I've done the exact same thing. I mean, this
Yeah,
is kind of why I started the podcast. This is why I started doing parties off the side of the podcast as the high frequency brand, because I wasn't getting booked by anyone. There was a big gap there where I was off the scene. I wasn't getting booked, and then of course, as soon as I had a party, and I said, I told some of the Auckland bars, they were just like, "Oh hell yeah, yeah, we want." We want some Wellington artists coming up or whatever.
yeah,
And but I suppose the only I don't know what your thoughts are on this, but what I've realised is that there's a lot of people doing parties. There's a lot of people that are creating their own brands. There's a lot of promotion companies popping up here and there, which is fantastic to see. But I think a lot of the motive of people creating these promotion agencies and these parties is for the same reason that you and me, I arguably created these, is to get themselves a gig so they could book themselves.
yeah. I 100% agree.
Well, and what that's doing is, again, arguably, what that's doing is that's creating quite a plethora of parties and promoters, but there's not enough people to come to all these gigs in a sense.
Yeah, we see that in Hawke's Bay 100%. I think there's a huge amount of great promoters in Hawke's Bay. And they're all great people, and we help each other out quite a lot. When I've got gigs and promoting gigs, they help me promote. They come along to the events, and I know I do the same for them. But it's almost like there's too many of them, and I think that you've got to think about what your brand is and what like that is about. High quality and less is more. So if you look at how frequently we do gigs, we do a gig every 3 months, sometimes 4 months. But we do it. We probably charge a higher ticket price, and we don't compromise on all those sorts of things that are important. We don't compromise on the venue. We don't compromise on the sound system. We make sure we get outstanding DJs that know what they're doing. We always like to support young up and coming DJs, and we generally get a younger person or the younger in their journey being a DJ to come and play that opening set. That opening set's just important as a closing set in my mind, but they still have to be a quality DJ. They have to know the music they're playing. They have to know how to mix. And they've, like I said before, they've got to be a good person. That they become a friend at the end of the day.
So when you put these parties on, how are you retaining your audience? And this is partially a question that I think a lot of newer promoters will be asking. Considering that you're in Hawke's Bay, there's actually a hell of a lot less people than there is in Auckland, arguably interested in the scene, interested in electronic music. There's a lot of drum and bass fans in Hawke's Bay. So how do you retain your audience? How do you get them to come back?
Yeah, good question. I think it comes down to, I think, the especially the promotional side of things. So it starts with the gig artwork, it starts with the gig name. Like, what are you going to call this thing? What are you going to call this thing that almost tells a story about what the gig's going to be about? I think the last one we did that stands out in my mind was called The Underside. And like that is sort of more about that underground sound. We don't necessarily play commercial or recognizable music. We like to play music that is probably a little that other people maybe don't play in Hawke's Bay. So um, yeah, we pull people together and have a good time.
Hmm. But you normally get the same people coming back to the parties, or do you find it's a different crowd each time? Or
Yeah, probably I think it's a different crowd each time. You definitely have your staples, like you have your main support crew that come along. I think the last couple of gigs we've probably seen a branch out of people coming, and I think that depends if you're doing an inside gig that may be a nighttime thing, or it's sort of an afternoon session where it's more a sunny day vibe. You're getting more families or different type of people coming. I think the last one we did that was the underside. That was the inside gig at the Urban Winery. Actually, we got a lot of drum and bass fans coming, and that was due to a good friend of LikeThat's Mainstage Entertainment, who are another promotional brand. Um, they actually have helped out a lot, the Hawke's Bay scene. So testament to Matt and Michaela, that do a fantastic job. They're house heads. They're absolute house heads, man. They love house and they play really good house, but they've been super smart about the way that they promote, and they've really noticed that obviously the 20 to 30-year-olds love drum and bass, and they've started doing these sort of dual events. So they don't just do house gigs; they do house and drum and bass. They pack out their gigs every time because they know the market. Either like that's just not really prepared to do that. They want to stick to that sort of brand of house music, and it's a little bit harder to get people along because I think we're playing a certain type of sound that maybe not be as popular. There maybe not be as many educated sort of underground house people in Hawke's Bay as there would be in the bigger cities.
Hmm. Do you think? I was talking to a friend about this recently who's based in Christchurch, and he's been on the podcast before, and we were talking a little bit about this education piece, kind of how much do you educate your audience and how much do you uh, do what they want to hear. So in other words, in Hawke's Bay, it's probably with it not being a city and not having a very diverse, again, arguably a very diverse crowd. Um, do you push that education thing with your underground sound? Do you sort of make sure that the DJs are trying to educate the audience on, hey, there's actually a style of music here that you've probably never heard before. Have a little bit of this, but then I'm going to pull it back and play something a bit more commercial to keep you on the dance floor. Do you sort of talk to them about that before they play?
Yeah, we definitely do, and I think I believe very strongly that it's the DJ's job to educate the crowd about the music. And I was talking to a guy up in Auckland once, actually, at an event that LikeThat was doing, and we're talking about down tempo music, and I love down tempo. There's obviously certain times of the day and night that you can play it, certain type of events you can, but this guy was a young DJ, and he said he loved down tempo, and he goes, I can just never play it in bars because people don't like it. And we started talking about, it's actually your job to educate the people to like it. So it's how you put that together. And that's why when we get together with the LikeThat crew and talk about what we're doing, we always talk about the type of sound we're playing, the type of music we're playing, and obviously that evolution through the night. I really struggle with putting together, I guess, your set, and keeping it quite underground, and throwing in those more commercial sort of beats. I think I think you obviously read the dancer on the night, and if the underground sounds aren't working, you obviously got to switch quite quickly to a more recognizable sound. But I think we always try and educate that crowd on that and that more underground sound for sure. And like I said, with that last gig we did with those people that really, they're actually, some of them were drum and bass DJs, but a couple of them were just drum and bass fans. After that gig that they came to, they were just blown away. They're like, "Whoa, house music is epic!" And we're actually starting to love it. And that word of mouth's only going to grow. Like that was only 3 months ago we did that event. Haven't done another one since. Um, so I think that word of mouth only grows, and we've just got to keep doing it. Like, I think as far as that education on house music in a smaller place like Hawke's Bay, we've just got to keep doing it and sticking to our guns with it.
Completely agree, man. I do believe it's the DJ's job to educate. I guess it's quite tough for some DJs out there. Well, probably the majority. Do I want to keep my job DJing at this bar, or do I want to branch out and try and educate the crowd and potentially lose the dance floor every time I do? Obviously, it really depends on where you're playing. If you're playing at Ink Bar, you can do what you want because you've promoted the night in a certain way, and they're all there to dance till 4 o'clock in the morning. We understand that, but if you're playing at Market Street, it's a bit different because I know what the crowd are like at Market Street. I've been there plenty of times to realise, and it's going to be very different to something at Ink Bar, hugely different. So I would say DJing at a place like that is actually harder, way harder.
Well, I agree. I think playing in those more commercial environments, commercial bars, are actually a lot harder. I mean, for example, I played at an event called the Enchanted Ball a couple of weekends ago, Um, and that was 650, 700 people that are drinking lots all night. People just want to sing. That sort of crowd just wants to sing. And when you're a house DJ, having recognizable tunes that have words in them is quite a challenging thing. And I loved it. I had a fantastic night. Got some really good feedback. But putting together the set list was probably more of a challenge than playing it at one of our underside events or at a Fitzroy event in Auckland, because it's such a different type of sound. To have those tracks that have the recognizable beats, to have the Michael Jackson remixes or the Dell remixes or the um, those sort of tunes that have those same loops that people go, oh, I've heard this before. They don't know where they've heard it, but it sounds familiar to them, and that's what gets them on the floor. So I think it comes back to, and maybe people don't think a lot about this, is a lot of DJing is the amount of effort that goes in behind the scenes. Like, it's not just standing up there for 2 hours and playing that music at the event. It's the 3 or 4 or 8 hours you've spent prior to that actually putting together all your music and listening to hours of music to make sure you get the right beats for the right event.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes. I mean, don't get me wrong. Digital music doesn't cost a lot these days, but it's finding it in the first place if you actually want to, again, educate the crowd. It's funny, really, because I think when I first started DJing, whenever that was, whatever year that was, I can't remember now, but I was
Was it that long ago? Like, how long was it how long have you been DJing for?
I don't know, man. I think I started learning in 2007. 2007. Yeah.
So you started on vinyl.
No, I actually didn't. I picked up vinyl later when it became cool. But I should have started on vinyl because at the end of the day, vinyl's way more challenging and way more fun, in my opinion. I get a little bit bored on digital decks. It's like I have to if I'm going to play digital all night, because of the way that I play, I don't do fancy tricks.
Yeah,
I don't I don't do any of that because the sound that I provide, probably much like yourself, you don't need fancy tricks to make it work. You just need to
yeah,
know your music really well and place them very, very well. And you need to know where to mix it in, where to mix it out, and how to mix it in and out. And you need to be able to listen to the tops, mids, and lows and decide what you're going to bring in and out first. And I think that in itself is a skill because you're actually using your ears. Now, when you're doing that with vinyl, you've got no choice but to use your ears. You have to,
yeah.
because
A
there's
lot
no
more
screen.
concentration. It
Yeah.
scares me. Like, I'd love to learn vinyl. I've got a couple of great DJs here that I get along to those afternoon events, where that vinyl, that scratchy, sort of vinyl vibe is just perfect. But it scares me, to be honest. Um,
It's pretty scary, man, and the amount of money that you can spend on records is just so stupid.
yeah, especially these days.
Oh hell yeah, and the delivery that it takes to get to this country as well is just crazy. Like I spend hundreds of dollars on records a month, and that's just because I'm a little bit addicted, but also because the shipping price doubles it. It doubles the
Yeah.
cost into this country. So
When you do vinyl and digital, do you get to a point where you prefer to play one or the other, or you're happy to do both?
I don't know, man. I think I prefer to do both because at the end of the day, I don't want to spend $1,000 a month on records, and I often find that sometimes I look at my record collection and I play a record and I think, you know what, I should have just bought that digital because I might never play it again, and it's like
Yeah, yeah,
$30 worth of a
yeah.
record that I might never play again.
I always remember what a good friend here said is he's got so many records that have got 5 songs on them, but he only likes one.
Yeah.
So you're buying the whole record just for one song.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. You do get it. It gets a little bit silly eventually, but but yeah, I mean, yeah, it's I don't know. Probably started in 2007, but I started digitally, and then I got a couple of residencies in Wellington here, um, and then yeah, it was CDs back then though. It wasn't USB. I just you had
Yeah,
to burn all your songs onto a CD, which I think a lot of people listening will probably remember. And then yeah, I think things obviously got advanced pretty quickly, but Yeah, I mean, I ended up leaving the country shortly after that and playing in the UK again, where it was still CDs, but then it quickly transitioned to USB, and that's where I kind of got into vinyl. And I was just like, it's kind of, I don't
Yeah.
know, I kind of like the collection aspect.
If I look back to sort of my journey starting DJ, and I think, if I could choose how to start my process of learning and DJing, I'd pick vinyl all day long because of, you haven't got those visuals. I think, and that's probably one of the reasons we see a lot more DJs today is it's so more accessible. Like, you can download music, you can whack it on a USB, or you can just plug in your laptop, and you've got all those visuals. You've got the wavelengths, and you've got the BPM and things like that. Whereas being vinyl, that's all, it's all just with your ear. So you learn your craft, I think, so you refine that so much better doing the playing vinyl. And obviously when that translates to digital, your systems and processes are just already sorted because you've got your ears in tune. What was it like with CDs? Was it the same? Did you have all those sort of did you have all those visualizations, or was it much the same as vinyl?
I honestly can't remember what the CDJs were like back then, but I do remember them having a screen. And they didn't have the full wavelength thing; they just had numbers on there, so they would tell
Yeah,
you how
like
far you were.
the old 900s or something. I think they've got the beat bar, so they've got like the 4 bar, and
Yeah,
they just have a line. So you don't have the wavelengths like the RGB wavelengths down the bottom. You've just got the beat bar. So I
that's right.
played on a set of those in Italy actually on some old 900s. I was lucky enough to travel there for work, and one of the guys that I knew over there had a friend that owned a bar, so he organised a session um, in Verona up in the hills there, which was quite cool. And they asked me what I wanted to play on. I was like, oh, some CDJ 3000s and a Nexus 900. And of
And
course they didn't really know what that was, I don't think, but I ended up getting like some old CDJ 900s and a mixer that was so ancient I didn't even know what it was, but it all came together all right.
yeah, that's right. No, I don't know, man. I think I do think the age of the digital DJ is a fantastic thing, and I'm never going to mock it because A, that's where I started, and B, I think I think it if you don't rely on things like BeatSync, which I know a lot of people do. Not that I'm dissing that because it's a great tool, but it just annoys me when I see people use it because it's just like, come on, just use your ears and learn it properly. But anyway, that's a thing for a different conversation. But if I think about the digital DJ, you you have a lot of music to play with, right? And which is a good and a bad thing. But at the same time, I think with the age of the wavelengths and the cue points and everything that you can do on the screen, I think it does create a degree of accuracy that you just can't get with vinyl.
Yeah,
And sometimes
yeah,
that's
100%.
exactly what you need to really create a cohesive set. I do think that, and I, there's pros and cons to each one. And yeah, I think people do need to learn a bit more with their ears these days. I think that's something that I think we lack a little bit. The visual aspect's fantastic at the end of the day.
Well, one of the bits of advice I got from a friend actually when I was learning was cover the screen up, like put a piece of tape or something over the screen and actually practice at home, with the cue button, with the tap, listen to your 1, 2, 3, 4, and actually don't look at it, which actually helped dramatically, sort of not having that visual.
Have you
And
tried? Sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, recording music was always a good one as well to, record your sets and then listen back to them. So you can actually hear that transition because obviously when you're playing, whether you're playing on headphones or you're playing on a system at home, you hear it quite differently to what the audience is obviously hearing. So that's something else was another good bit of advice I got is record what you're playing at home and listen back to it and learn from it.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good tip. That's actually something that I don't think anyone's mentioned on the podcast before. So thanks for that. That's a really good tip. And also, those people who are just starting out as well. As you just alluded to, when you're playing, you're not really hearing the mix properly because you are listening to two tunes at once.
Yeah,
and I don't think our brains are actually able to, although we can match them up in terms of their BPM. I don't think we're actually able to distinguish what that sounds like together on the sound system, depending on how you mix. If you mix with both songs in your headphones, then fair enough. But 9 times out of 10, you're going to have one headphone off your ear, listening to the tune on the PA, and then one on your ear. And I don't think we can really hear those songs properly together, so we don't really know what the mix sounds like. We just kind of hope for the best. If you
just
got
kind of hoping. Yeah, you judge it by the response of the crowd. If they're loving it, then you're doing something right.
yeah, that's right. Yeah. So I was just going to ask, what have you tried or have you considered producing music or getting into that at all?
Yeah, again, it's probably one of those things a bit like playing vinyl that, I sort of sit here and go, man, I'd love to produce my own music. I feel like the type of music that I download and play has quite a unique sound. So that would translate to my production. To be honest, I just don't know where to start. Like, there's so many, and it's a bit like that with, when you start DJing is where do I get my music from? What website should I go to? Who's going to tell me what website should I go to? What platform should I use? Should I use Serato? Should I use Recordbox? Should I use some online thing? And producing is exactly the same for me. Like, I actually bought Ableton. Like, I bought sort of an entry level version of that probably 5 months ago, and I don't think I've even installed it on my laptop yet. It's still sitting there. And I think you can come up with all the excuses in the world. It's like anything. You procrastinate. Um, you could procrastinate at the things that seem hard, and I think that's one of the things for me um, is to actually take the time to sit down and go, right, I'm going to start in Logic, or I'm going to start in Ableton, and I'm actually going to start pulling some beats together. Where I think I need to go with it is actually sit down with someone that's done it, and actually say, hey, start with the, don't use either of those bits of software. Try this to start off with, and this is where you start. And I think, I don't know, like for you, I mean, you produce music. Have you ever been musical? I guess, like, have you, reading music important? Is understanding how, those songs go together important? When we look at house music, especially, you've got intros and you've got breakdowns, and you've got sort of bridges and songs and things like that. But I've never been able to read music. I guess I wouldn't say wouldn't call myself a musician. Um, do you think that's important to be able to start producing?
It's a really good question, and I think if I sit here and say yes, I'd be lying. And the reason why, so I have been musical. I can play drums, I can play guitar, I can play a little bit of piano, and I've been in a couple of bands when I was younger. So, but at the end of the day, I don't think I don't think the actual skill of playing an instrument transfers to making electronic house music or dance music or whatever.
Yeah,
But I do think the
yeah,
ability to understand music with your ears and your brain, like, oh, this should come next. Every 8 bars, something new should come in. Maybe we need a
yeah,
bit of a break here. I'm kind of getting a little bit bored of this loop. That kind of intuition is really important for making house music or any dance music for that matter. But so I think two of the biggest things that I would personally advise anyone who's going to start producing music is a don't create so many rules for yourself, because the moment that you put yourself in boxes and create rules, you stunt your creativity. And I've been through that so many times over the last 3 years. The other thing would probably be um, make your tracks DJable, because at the end of the day, our our music has to be DJable, right? It has to be, because if it's not, it's meant to be on an album on Spotify or something. And yeah,
yeah. That's a really interesting point. I think I think that's something I've probably only learned really in the last sort of year or so, with the type of music that I'm listening to and downloading for my gigs and for my sets, is the, actually buying DJable music. And you don't know what that is when you start, right? Like, you're listening to Spotify, you're like, whoa, that's a great track. People are going to dance to this, or people are going to go off to this. I might go and find that online. I'm going to buy it and whack it into Record Box, and I'm going to play that at my next gig. Um, quite quickly you learn that they're the ones that are the super clunky mixes that you're just like, oh, that's no good. I won't try that again. So yeah, making DJable music or buying DJable music is a really really good point.
And don't get me wrong, there's plenty of times that I sit down in front of my laptop and my Digitact and stuff, and I sort of think to myself, I don't want to make anything DJable. I just want to sit here and just make whatever I want.
Just want to make
And
something. What software are you using? What's the software that you're using to
Ableton,
produce?
yeah, I use
Ableton, yeah.
Ableton Suite. So I bought the intro version like you did, but then I realized that there was a lot of stuff in there that I wanted to use that I didn't have access to, so I just upgraded it. But I
Yeah,
think I think I think one of the really important thing is that if you learning how to produce music and continuing to produce music takes a hell of a lot of time. Learning how to be a DJ and continuing to be a DJ with all the factors that you mentioned earlier on, such as your social media, your press kit, constantly getting mixes out there, that all takes a hell of a lot of time as well. And I think having both disciplines and having a full-time job like you and I do is really, really difficult,
yeah, right. Yeah,
because when the hell are you going to spend time with your family? It's just you've got to either pick one or the other, or you've got to say one's going to take a back seat and I'm going to focus on this for a little while, and maybe I'll get the odd gig, or maybe I'm just going to gig loads and just maybe sack production off for a month or two, or whatever. So I do think that's something to consider.
yeah. I've heard a lot of even some of the people you've spoken to on the podcast is they talk about picking it up and putting it down quite often. And I think when I look at you take famous DJs, take Fisher for instance. He's standing up there throwing it down, traveling the world, living the dream. He doesn't make his own beats. He's got someone else in the background, supporting him, and that seems a clever way of doing it. Is you having people surrounding you making music that he obviously has a massive input to it. But from what I've learned, I don't think he actually sits down and actually makes the music himself. Not someone like James Hype, who actually, he promotes himself making his own music. And maybe he doesn't make all his own music, but you see a lot of it. A lot of it he does. So it's another approach you can take as well, is working with people to make your music. And sort of, I guess you become like you're almost like a band in a way, but one person's fronting the band, the other person's in the background.
Yeah, and another thing that I would say is something that I've kind of fallen short of is not doing enough collaborations with people. I'm constantly trying to work on music on my own, but then it's only one brain, one creativity angle. And if you're working with someone else on a track and you have some back and forths and they add something that you didn't think about, and you're like, oh fuck, I really like that, it it just adds another element, another dimension to the music. And I think it's also, music's meant to be shared, man. This whole creative thing and standing behind the decks and having that amazing feeling like you did, you do when you gig, excuse me, it you can't replace that feeling, and I do think that's meant to be shared. I do really think that, and that's partially why you get so much of a high when you've got the crowd in front of you.
I'd agree with that. I think that anything creative, is best shared. I mean, you look at creative jobs, whether you're designing products or you're designing interiors or whatever, you're doing artwork. I think some of the best output that comes from that is actually sharing that with someone and working together on that. So, and we spend that's like when like I said earlier, when we put together gigs for like that, we always get together with the crew and talk about what we're playing and the type of music and what we've been listening to. And I've found in the past that sort of some DJs are quite reluctant to share their music. It's almost like their IP, and it is in a way. They've spent a lot of time listening to it. They've paid money to download it. It's like, I'm not going to show anyone my music. That's for me to share when I'm playing gigs. But I think that the best learnings come from us getting together and sharing what we're listening to and sharing music. And it's not like we're going to go away and steal that music. It's we might like something and go and listen to the artist or the record company where it came from and get other ideas, and that's that only helps with growth with everyone that is in that circle doing that.
I completely agree, and I sometimes fall into this camp where I've hunted on Bandcamp for 3 days, and I've hunted on fucking Discogs for 10 days and I've bought all this music and I'm like, oh shit, yeah, no one else is going to have this music. But then in reality, other people 100% have the music because it's been out there for years, you know, and it's like,
Yeah, there's thousands, if not millions, of people in the world that have got that track, right?
exactly,
But
yeah.
you feel special because you've found this track that you're like, this is going to pump, man. Everyone's going to love this when I play it.
Yeah, oh, absolutely, and it's a little bit of naivety, you know, and I think I've only sort of developed that since I've been in New Zealand, thinking, oh, there's not that many people that play this kind of music in this country, so I'm going to be one of the only ones, and in reality, it's not the case.
Yeah, well, it goes back to that education piece we talked about earlier, right? The more you share what you're doing, the more people are going to see that. And I think you go back to some of those more famous DJs again, like Solomon comes to mind. You know, he puts together a playlist of stuff that he likes every 3 or 4 months and releases it on Spotify. It's not his music. It's just stuff that he's been listening to that he likes that he go, oh, I'm going to share this because it actually creates a vibe and is part of my brand. So I don't know, maybe that's something I need to start doing.
I
To
think,
have a like that Spotify page.
yeah, that could be a cool idea, man. I like that, and I don't know how you're finding it, but you know, one journey that I've been through, particularly in the last sort of 5 or 6 years, is uh, 5 or 6 years ago, I thought to myself, I am well into the underground music right now. Like I'm finding all these artists that are super underground and like no one else knows who they are. And then 2 years later, 3 years later, I'm like, oh, like I've gone down another layer of kind of finding smaller artists and underground artists, and then you constantly keep going down this rabbit hole.
Going deeper and deeper.
You do, man, and you know what you once thought was super underground isn't underground anymore because it's super commercial in your eyes because you've embarked on this new kind of level. How are you finding that?
Well, so that's an interesting question. I think that like I've sort of finding maybe it's not underground as such, but it's older music. So I sort of adapted this sort of theory over the last couple of times I've been searching for gigs. Take Beatport for instance. You know, you find an artist that you like, or you find a record label you like, and you go to tracks and you select house or tech house and you filter it. And you actually, I've started filtering it oldest to newest. So you don't get all the new stuff. You go back to the old stuff. Some of it goes back to like 1990s, early 2000s. I think the ones that you find that don't have that good production quality are obviously a little bit disappointing. You find some pretty good tunes, but they just don't have that production quality. So you go past those. But you find music that people maybe aren't listening to these days because you know they're listening to the here and now. They might be going back 10 years, they might be going back 15 years. But if you think you're going back to the 1990s or the early 2000s, that's 20 years ago. So that can be a really good way of finding not necessarily underground tunes, but older tunes that people just aren't listening to today. So I've found some great beats with sort of adapting that, especially with artists, you know, like DJ Sneak, for instance, who you know he goes back generations. You know, he I think Andy Van spoke about him. You know, being a DJ that's and has been doing it for so long. He just released a couple of new tracks last week, and they're absolute bangers. I've got them on my set list for next time I play, and I'd think that's an underground sound, but you know, he's on Spotify and it's sort of accessible to everyone. So, you know, is that an underground sound? I don't know.
Yeah, you can kind of wonder what is an underground sound over and over again, but I think it really just comes back to the person who thinks it's underground just hasn't heard it before.
That's it. I mean, what defines underground for me is it's a it's a it's a it's a it's a track that majority of the people that you're playing to haven't heard it or you know don't know who the artist is. And I mean that's when I started DJing, I wanted to find the most underground tracks ever. But I think you've got to have a balance with that, especially when you've got a smaller population of educated people that you're playing to when it especially comes to house music.
Yeah, 100%, man, 100%. And how do you? So obviously you were in Auckland at one point. You've moved back to Hawke's Bay. What would you say the main contrast is? Obviously, the people, the amount of places to play. But in terms of well, whatever you want to share, really. What's the main contrast in terms of the two places?
I think it's yeah. Obviously, population's a massive one, but not only that. It's not the amount of people; it's the amount of people that love that sort of music and want to go out and party to that sort of music. So in Hawke's Bay, I guess Hawke's Bay is it's a smaller city. It's slower pace. It maybe attracts maybe a bigger population of retirees and sort of young families that they move to Hawke's Bay or grow up in Hawke's Bay, but they move to Hawke's Bay to have a slower life, so they're not necessarily coming to go and party every weekend. And obviously, being in Auckland, a bigger city, there's far more people doing that. That even doesn't matter how old they are. They could be 20s, they could be 40s, they could be 50s. There's a bigger population of people doing that, and I think having the locations makes a massive difference. So having a choice of bars where the bar owners just want people to come and they want people to come and rave. We have zero of those here, and I think you talked about that in Wellington being one of the challenges as well.
Yeah, well, Wellington's a strange place at the moment, man. And I used to, I moved to Wellington at one point, and then I went back to the UK for a little while, and then I came back to Wellington because I couldn't get it out of my head. I loved the place. It was such a vibe,
Yeah,
man. It was so cool, and it was super young crowd everywhere, but not kind of like the young people that it is today. But it's just a real shame to see. It's quite heartbreaking to see Wellington at the moment because it has, and I don't want to be fucking negative Nancy over here, but it has gone downhill big time in comparison. And everyone I speak to who's lived in Wellington for 5+ years pre-pandemic has said the exact same thing, and that's without me even alluding to it in the
so
first place.
would you say it was better, like the scene was better pre-pandemic, like pre 2020?
Yeah, I would say that. I think the first point where it dropped off was when the alcohol, and I've spoken about this on the podcast before, where the alcohol licensing laws changed from a 6 a.m. closing time to a 4 a.m. closing time. Because what that did is that closed down some of the best clubs in Wellington, well, all of the best clubs in Wellington.
When did that happen? That must have been late. That must have been early 20s, 2000s, was it? Or
2013, 2014, I think it happened around
yeah,
that time. I can't
yeah.
remember the
That's it.
exact
You're
time.
probably right actually, because I studied in Wellington. We lived there for 5 years, and I'm going like early 2005 to 2010. I remember
Mm.
going out to sandwiches till 8 a.m.
Yeah.
Like you'd preload at home and do what you did, and you'd head out, about midnight, and you'd have 8 hours to party. And that wasn't the only place. There was a couple of other places down off Courtney Place there that were open till 6, 8 a.m.
Yeah, yeah. And Bryce, the guy who used to own sandwiches, I still catch up with him every now and again, and he openly admits that that's what closed the club down because he made the majority of his money between
Yeah, that's what killed it.
wholesales. Yeah, and that's, and again, this is a long time ago, so I shouldn't keep bringing it up. But I think when people ask the question, "What do you think's happened to Wellington?" Well, I actually have to take it further back to that point. And look, that affected the entire country, but I just think it hit Wellington quite hard because you know how small it is here, right?
Yeah,
And there was only so many places to actually go. And the recent closure of Club 121, I think that's completely killed it as well. And
it kind of says it all. Yeah, and I think you look at no, you look back at the closing times, and you look back at, like, I mean, you look at Ink Bar that opens at 10 o'clock. But people just, if owning a bar in a smaller town like Hawke's Bay, they just wouldn't survive. They just wouldn't be able to make ends meet if they were opening at 10 p.m. If they were able to close at 8 a.m., it might be a little bit different because you've got basically 8 hours, a whole day of trading to do. But I guess Ink Bar survives because every time they open, they're packed. Whereas bars here rely more on opening at 12 o'clock and people coming in for food and drink, and closing at 10 o'clock. So there's very little of them that want to open till 4 a.m. And I think that you've got a lot of bars in residential locations. So obviously Napier Town's quite small. There's apartments and things above bars and next to bars. Their closing time has definitely been an effect on it for sure.
From what I've gathered, and I'm comparing this to some other countries around the world that I've spent time in. I think New Zealand probably has one of the most strict alcohol licensing laws in the world in terms of closing times and what bars can and can't do. And because I've worked in the hospitality industry for a long period of time, this is obviously how I know Steve from Market Street. The battle that these places have to go through to actually keep their venue alive, because there's so much hassle they get from the Ministry of Health and the government around alcohol, yeah, all that kind of stuff. It's a massively costly thing to do to be compliant in that space in this country. And it's probably the reason why there isn't that many places these days, and probably why a lot of places close down in Wellington, for example. But I mean, on a positive note, though, I don't believe it's going to be like this forever. And I've said this a few times on the podcast. It can't be. It can't be like this forever. It has to come back full circle, because it's just what happens to cities, right? And the same thing might happen to Auckland. Auckland might go into a big dip, and then it might come out again. And I just think that's what happens.
I think we're definitely coming, or we're definitely seeing growth in it. And I mean, people like us that love house music and love the scene, and we want to party and we want to have that recognition. There's nothing like standing up there and getting that recognition from the crowd when you're playing. Like, we'll keep doing it because we do that. Like, and that's what we thrive on. So I think, like I said earlier, there's a lot of promoters in Hawke's Bay that are continuing to do that. They're helping that scene out. We've got a couple of great festivals that happen in Hawke's Bay. You got Outfields, you got Nest Fest, Arcadian. There's a really good bunch of people that they're keeping on pushing, and they've struggled. They've struggled financially, like with their festivals. But I think there's a real strong community in Hawke's Bay of people, volunteers and supporters, that they love that scene as much as the promoters and DJs do, but they're not necessarily promoters or DJs. They're the people that would be there dancing. But there's been there's a couple of the bigger festivals have really created a community around themselves to get those volunteers to come and help out, and they get hooked up with tickets, and they get to be part of a crew that pulls these things together. We see a lot of that in Hawke's Bay, and that we're super proud of that. That we've got that community that can do that, and I think any of those promoters can pull on that, and you see it at all the different gigs. The people that come and help them out, and come and do the lighting, or come and help them out on the door, or just come to dance. They're there all the time doing it, and they're not getting paid for it. They're there because we love it. They love it, but they love it from a different side of it. So we're seeing that growth. I think every summer, we see a little bit more. In like I said to you earlier, they're having some nice long hot summer days in Hawke's Bay. We feel the vibe coming back. Like, people are tapping their toes again, and they're out and about. And, there's nothing like some long hot days to bring that vibe back and get people out on the weekends, and that just continues to grow, to get people, because obviously once they've had an afternoon drink in the sun, and they're like, what are we going to do now? We need to go and dance somewhere. So we'll keep doing what we're doing, and keep supporting the industry to create these events, and play music and bring people together.
Yeah, nice, man, nice. So what's next for Like That? Have you got any things lined up in the future?
We don't have anything booked in Hawke's Bay. I think I was just been in touch with one of the events managers at Fitzroy, to get back up there early, probably February. Love going to Auckland. I think one of the best things about Auckland is you're guaranteed a busy night because of the population. Promotion's really easy in Auckland, because the places where we play, we don't sell tickets. We get a percentage of the bar taking, so it's always a low stress promotion. Obviously, you're not selling tickets, so um, and then moving on into March, we'll probably do another event at Urban Winery, and then we'll have a few more up our sleeve. We've got I started a sort of a gig brand called Pineapple Sundays. So Pineapple Sundays was started, for that that very idea of that global love of the Sunday session. Everyone loves a good Sunday session, and I think I actually had the idea when I went to Bondi. I don't know if you've ever been to that club out on Bondi Beach on a Sunday. I think it's it pumps. It's probably one of the only bars I've ever been on a Sunday that was bigger than a Saturday night. And I was like, hey, we can do this. We could do this in Hawke's Bay, man. Like, there's nothing like a sunny afternoon and people wanted to come along. So I think the weather's been a massive challenge for doing outdoor events. So Pineapple Sundays, we promoted our first event probably a month or so back, just as spring started, and it was been so wet. We actually ended up pulling the pin on the day. The next sunny day was going to be a Saturday, and I was like, oh, I can't do this on a Saturday. It's Pineapple Sundays. It's just not going to work. So we pivoted quite quickly and created another brand called Apple Saturdays.
Brilliant.
So
I love it.
everyone was like, what's next? So I was like, oh, well, I've got Watermelon Wednesdays up my sleeve, but I don't know if anyone's going to want to rave on a Wednesday.
Be good if people did.
So, we just keep thinking of different ideas to, like I said earlier about the naming and branding of the gigs. That's something that, I take quite seriously. So it's always cool to have a cool name and cool branding. So it just helps with it.
Forever inspired by fruit. I like it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, if you look back at what pineapples mean, and that was the reason for the name is they mean hospitality and prosperity and people coming together and sharing in a good time. So I was like, that's perfect for a Sunday session. Apples were a little bit different. They're more about growth and life and that sort of thing. Watermelons don't really have a good connotation, so I haven't used that one yet.
Hydrated Wednesdays.
Hydrated, yeah. Bananas are probably another good one.
Get your potassium in.
But that idea actually started for when I was putting together all my set lists, and I always had to have a name for my set lists. And I was like, I'm going to name them they have to be named after a food or a drink. So like all my Spotify playlists, for instance, that I listen to are all named after a food, or they're called like marshmallow or duck fat or something like that.
It's pretty good. I like it. Maybe I need to adopt something like that again.
It's what happens when you're creative, eh? You just keep coming up with all these crazy ideas.
Yeah, man. Yeah, I hear you. So I guess one thing that I'll do, Ryan, is I'll pop the link to LikeThat and also to your DJ page on Instagram and SoundCloud in the description of this podcast below, where you listen to the podcast in Apple or Spotify or whatever it is. And I guess I kind of wanted to know your thoughts. Like, you've come onto the scene post-COVID, and you've started up post-COVID, which is arguably one of the hardest times to have started up a brand and started up a promotion agency as well, and you're in Hawke's Bay as well, which may make it more difficult. What are the biggest lessons or lesson have you learned since starting, and where do you think you're going to be going in 2024?
Yeah, good question. I think I think with like that, and especially just DJing myself, is to just keeping an open mind about what you're doing. Like for instance, I said I played at the Enchanted Ball the other week. To 650 people, but they didn't want to hear house music. They wanted to hear songs with lyrics in it, and I think it really sort of opened my mind to the fact of, hey, if I want to be playing more often in Hawke's Bay at events, is you may have to change your mind on the type of sound that you're playing. You may have to your open your gate a little bit to different people coming in to play with like that aren't necessarily these underground DJs that are playing music that people haven't heard before. It's they're playing a more recognizable sound. I might have to think about bringing in some drum and bass DJs. I don't know.
Yeah. If you want to grow the brand, I mean, it might be a good idea, but I suppose it's kind of like it's something that way back when I started High Frequency, I considered, but I just know that that's not in my heart to do that. And I know that it would be a real mix for the brand. It's like you kind of play this fine line between growing your audience and really sticking to what you've decided to do.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Oh, and it comes back to sort of those classic things of that Hamish Pinkham mentioned, is about being a good person, being humble, communicating politely, and it's about creating that brand as well. Hawke's Bay is a small place, and generally, if you're out in the public eye, doing things where you're creating events and people are coming, people know who you are, even if you don't think they know who you are. If you're walking down the street, they're like, "Oh, there's that guy that's a DJ, or there's that guy that has LikeThat, or he does this, he does that." You've got to walk tall, and you've got to hold yourself well, and you've got to sort of be open to talking to strangers that you might not necessarily know, but they know who you are, and you've got to be human about it. That's really important to getting people to come to your gigs. Is the more they know you, and the more they know who you are, and the more they know what you do, you're gonna have a relationship with them, and they're gonna come to it. So yeah, lots of learnings about that. Over the last year for sure.
And what do you reckon? Have you got any goals or plans for 2024 with both your own personal brand and the promotion agency?
Yeah, so I think I've got some pretty big aspirations to get to some of these bigger festivals. R&B would be one. I think playing at someone like Om would be really cool to do, and probably expanding my horizons out a little bit to some of these promoters that are doing the bigger events. More so to play myself as a DJ, but to learn from them as well, and how I can grow my promotional brand, and take that next step to doing 1,000, 2,000 people events rather than just the 200 and 300 events. Where you go into a venue where kind of everything's there. You're really just maybe bringing a sound system and some DJ gear and a table to put it on, and you're playing it, to actually creating events where you're taking everything from the lights in the car park to the portaloos to the sound system to the food trucks. That would be something that I really want to do for LikeThat, is start thinking about those sort of gigs, because we've got some amazing outdoor venues around Hawke's Bay. As we're surrounded by beautiful wineries and some beautiful country. So to put on these sort of events at some of these amazing locations that are maybe not necessarily renowned for um, music events, are more renowned for nice wine and food, is to connect with some of these winery owners and say, hey, this is what we want to do, and meeting some like-minded owners that want to do that, and just keep hustling. I think keep putting yourself out there, keep playing music, keep connecting with people that like that same music, that are on that same vibe, and keep an open mind to meet new people and grow into it, and don't let age be a barrier. I think as we get a bit older, we sort of, I hear a lot of people say, "Oh, I'm old now. That's not achievable," and I think that's rubbish. You look at some of especially the older musicians and DJs around New Zealand, that they're in their 50s, mid 50s, late 50s. I don't think age should be a barrier at all. I think it's the vibe that you bring, and how you portray yourself, and the brand that you create is really, really important.
Yeah, some really wise words there, Ryan. I really appreciate that, and I do really agree with you about the keeping an open mind thing. I think that's something that as DJs, as music producers, we have to keep an open mind, because there's no pinnacle that you get to where you've learned everything in this game. I really just never think it's achievable. And if you think you've learned something, if you think you've learned everything, you haven't. It's impossible.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
keeping an open mind
Yeah.
is really, really important. So that's really good advice. Cool. All right. Well, that's been a really good chat. Thank you. And I'm sure the audience really understand and can relate to a lot of the things that you talked about today. Obviously, everyone's on their own journey, and I think sharing the story from someone like you mentioned before, Andy Van, who's been doing this since the 80s, and then someone who's been doing this since 2020. I think both of those stories are just as relevant in today's game, and we can really learn something from anyone's story, as long as they've embarked upon the journey and they're putting the effort in. So thank you for that.
Yeah. No, cool, man. I really appreciate coming on, and it's cool to share your story, share my story, and hear a bit about what you're up to. And yeah, I'll just close by saying a quote that kind of relates back to that, what I was talking about before. So the quote is, "The magic you're looking for is in the work you've been avoiding."
I love that, man. That's so true, eh?
Absolutely.
And doing something every day that
And
you don't want to
I
do.
say that for myself. Sorry.
Doing something every day that you don't want to do, you know?
Absolutely, yeah. And I say that for myself as much as sharing that with anyone else. Is, like the whole getting to producing music, is there's some magic there somewhere,
Yeah.
and I'm avoiding it. Just get in and do it.
Yeah, man. Yeah,
Just get
yeah.
in and do it.
Well, you know where you can come to if you need a hand with music production. I feel like I've learned a couple of things over the last 3 or 4 years. So, yeah, hit me
Yeah,
up.
no, it sounds like it. I'll definitely be tapping into that.
Wicked. Thanks, man. Appreciate you. And yeah, I'll pop all the links to your social media and SoundCloud and everything in the description of this podcast. And if you're ever in the Hawke's Bay, everyone, please do check out DJ LarryNobody and also the LikeThat promotion agency for any of the events that they might be doing in the Hawke's Bay. And otherwise, we'll catch you next time.